The day my grandmother died, I was the one who drove 4 hours through a sleet storm to sit beside her bed. I was the one who held her hand at the end. And I was the one who, 6 weeks later, sat across a Cracker Barrel table in Harlan, Kentucky, and watched my cousin Brenda slide a 4-page document toward me like she was passing the biscuits. I was 38 years old, and I was about to find out exactly what my family thought I was worth. I have lived my entire life in the eastern Kentucky mountains. My daddy worked underground in the coal mines for 22 years. My mama waitressed until her knees gave out. We weren't poor, but we were careful. There is a difference, and it matters. My grandmother, Nola Jean, was the gravitational center of it all. She lived on 12 acres in a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch that she managed perfectly until the last 18 months, when her mind started to slip. I lived 40 minutes from her place. My older brother Dale lived 3 hours away in Lexington. My cousin Brenda, Dale's daughter from his first marriage, lived in Nashville and drove a car that cost more than my mortgage. But I was the one who checked on Nola Jean twice a week. I was the one who drove her to her cardiologist, who organized her weekly pill case, who sat with her through the nights when she got confused and frightened, when she called me by my mother's name and asked me if supper was ready. I didn't do it for credit. I did it because she was my grandmother, and someone had to. What I did not know during all those years of driving up that gravel road was that my brother Dale was having a very different kind of conversation with her. She passed on a Tuesday in January. Cold, clear morning. The kind where the sky is a hard blue, and the ridgeline looks like it was cut with scissors. I had been with her the night before. I drove home at midnight and got the call at 6:52 in the morning from the hospice nurse. I sat on the edge of my bed with the phone in my hand for a while. Then I called my boss, called the funeral home, called Dale. Dale arrived the next afternoon in a rented Tahoe. He was wearing a fleece vest and clean boots, and he hugged me in the doorway of Nola Jean's house and said, "She's at peace now, Dar." I nodded. I went back to organizing her kitchen because organizing things is how I cope with the world falling apart. The funeral was on a Friday. Half of Harlan County came through those doors. Nola Jean had been the kind of woman who made you want to be better just by being in the room with her. At the reception afterward, my cousin Brenda pulled me aside and said, in a voice she clearly thought was casual, that we needed to have a family meeting the following weekend about the estate. I said that was fine. I said I'd be there. The meeting was held at Cracker Barrel because Brenda said she didn't want anyone to feel like it was happening on home turf. I thought that was an interesting thing to say about a family meeting. Dale was already in a booth when I got there. Brenda was across from him. There was a man I didn't recognize sitting beside Brenda in a pressed button-down shirt who turned out to be her attorney from Nashville. An attorney, at Cracker Barrel, in Harlan County, for a family conversation about our grandmother's estate. I sat down. I ordered coffee. I smiled. My daddy always said you could tell everything about a person by watching how they treat a waitress and how they behave before they think the real conversation has started. Brenda ordered a water and kept looking at her phone. The attorney kept rearranging his silverware. Dale wouldn't meet my eyes. That was when I understood that the 4-page document Brenda slid across the table was not a surprise to my brother. She called it a family agreement, a way to honor Nola Jean's wishes while keeping things fair for everyone. She said the words fair for everyone the way you say bless her heart. Right to someone's face, with a smile, meaning something else entirely. I picked it up. I began to read. I am a paralegal at a small firm in Harlan. I have been one for 11 years. I read documents for a living. I know what language looks like when it's trying to seem simple. Page 1 was all warmth. Recitals about family unity, about Nola Jean's love for her grandchildren, about her wish that the farm remain a gathering place for generations. Page 2 was where it started to shift. Nola Jean's estate, as it turned out, had been partially amended. There was a codicil added 14 months before her death, during the period when she had begun to have trouble remembering what year it was, that restructured the distribution of the farm. Instead of being split equally between her surviving children's lines, the codicil directed the farm itself, the 12 acres, the White House, the outbuildings, the garden, all of it, into a family LLC managed by Dale, with Brenda as co-trustee, and me listed as a beneficiary with a non-voting interest. I read that phrase twice. Non-voting interest. I was allowed to benefit from the farm. I was not allowed to make decisions about it. I was allowed to show up. I was not allowed to have a say. Page 3 laid out the proposed terms of the LLC agreement Brenda wanted me to sign that afternoon. It was detailed, thoughtfully formatted. Someone had spent real money on it. I set it down. I folded my hands on the table. I kept my face neutral the way I have learned to do after 11 years of sitting in rooms where people are upset about documents. Dale finally looked at me. "Dar," he said. "We just want to keep things together. Keep the land in the family. You know how Mama felt about that land." I said, "I know exactly how she felt about that land. I was there." A little silence settled. Brenda jumped in. "The codicil is legal. We had it reviewed. There's nothing—" She paused. "There's nothing to contest. I just want you to understand the reasoning." "I want to understand the codicil," I said. "When was it signed?" Dale said, "March of last year." I said, "Who took her to the attorney's office?" Dale's jaw tightened. "I did." I said, "Was anyone else present?" Brenda said, "The attorney and the notary." I said, "Was I notified?" Brenda said, "Darlene, I know this feels—" I said, "I didn't ask how it feels. I asked if I was notified." Nobody answered. The waitress came and refilled my coffee. I thanked her. I watched Dale stare at the table. Here is what I knew. Nola Jean in March of last year had started calling me by my mother's name. She had started leaving her stove burners on. She had cried twice during my visits because she couldn't remember the name of the creek that ran behind the house where she grew up. She had been confused. She had been frightened. And someone had taken her to an attorney's office. I did not say any of this at the Cracker Barrel table. I said, "I'm going to need a copy of the original codicil and the attorney's records." Brenda's attorney said, "That's something we'd need to facilitate through the estate." I said, "That's fine. I'll contact the estate attorney directly." Dale said, "Dar, you're making this harder than it needs to be." I looked at my brother then. I really looked at him, at his clean fleece vest, at the way he held his coffee cup, at the 14 months he had apparently spent driving our grandmother to an office while I was driving her to her cardiologist. I said, "Dale, I drove her to every doctor's appointment for 4 years. I sat with her when she didn't know where she was. I organized her medications. I was with her the night before she died." He said, "We know you were there for her, Dar. That's not the question." I said, "I think it's exactly the question." I did not sign anything. I paid for my own coffee at a meeting they had called, walked out of that restaurant on a gray January afternoon with 4 pages of careful language in my purse, and called my Aunt Patsy from the parking lot. Patsy is my mother's older sister. She lives out on Bledsoe Creek, has the kind of calm that comes from watching people make mistakes for a very long time, and she does not suffer nonsense. When I told her I needed to come by, she just said, "I've got soup on." I drove out to her place, sat at her kitchen table, and told her everything. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "Who witnessed the codicil?" I said I didn't know yet. She said, "Find out, and find out who drew it up. Don't call Dale. Call the probate court directly. Get the filing date." Then you'll know what you're looking at. She poured me more soup. Then she said something I have thought about almost every day since. Darlene, your grandmother loved you. What happened to that document is not what she intended, but what your brother thought he could get away with. That tells you something about what he believed you would do about it. He thought you'd be grateful to be included at all. I felt that land somewhere between my ribs. I have a friend from the firm named Cassie, who has been a paralegal for 16 years and has a gift for finding things in public records. By the end of the week, she had pulled the filing information. The attorney who drew it up was not Nola Jean's regular attorney. The codicil had been prepared by a firm in Lexington, Dale's City, filed without her regular lawyer's knowledge. Cassie said over the phone, "Do you know if your grandmother had any documented cognitive decline during this period?" I said, "I have 2 years of medical visit notes and a letter from her cardiologist." Cassie said, "Get them all together." I did. And then, I didn't just challenge the codicil, I made sure Dale felt the full weight of his mistake. I had my firm serve Dale the papers directly at his office in Lexington. I wanted him to be holding the documents when he realized exactly who he had tried to swindle. When he called me, his voice was shaking with anger. "Dar, what are you doing? You're tearing this family apart over a piece of land." I kept my voice dead level. "I'm not doing anything, Dale. The medical records from the week you dragged her to a stranger's law firm are doing it. The lack of an independent competency assessment is doing it. You thought I just poured coffee and smiled. You forgot I read documents for a living." The silence on the line was absolute. It was the sound of a man realizing the trap he built had just snapped shut on his own leg. Brenda's fancy Nashville attorney took one look at the discovery file my firm put together and withdrew from the matter 3 weeks in. Dale didn't even show up to the first hearing. The farm is still in probate. I am not going to tell you it is fully resolved because the law is slow. But it is contested, which is exactly what it should have been from the beginning. 14 months after Nola Jean passed, on a Tuesday afternoon, I drove out to her farm. The house was empty. The garden was overgrown. I walked around to the back and stood at the edge of what had been her kitchen garden, looking out at the ridgeline. My Aunt Patsy's voice came back to me. What he thought you would do about it. He thought I'd accept the non-voting interest. He thought I'd be the agreeable one who showed up, did the work, and went home quietly. He had forgotten that the person who does the quiet work is usually the person who has been paying the closest attention. I have learned something at 38 that I wish I had known at 25. The people who count on your silence have usually already spent it. They have already built their plans around the version of you that does not read page 2. I read every page. I am still reading. Nola Jean Combs grew tomatoes in that garden for 60 years. She used to say that the best things take the full season and don't rush just because you're watching. I think about that on the days when the legal process is slow and the paperwork is heavy. I was never who they thought I was when they slid that document across the table. I was just the one they hadn't needed to reckon with yet. They needed to now. If you are someone who has ever been handed a document that assumed you wouldn't read it, I want you to know something. You are allowed to read it slowly. You are allowed to ask questions. You are allowed to call someone at 71 who has soup on the stove and knows exactly what you're worth. You are allowed to be the kind of quiet that is not agreement. People who try to write your story for you will always hand you the smallest part. They count on your silence. But the next time someone slides a piece of paper across a table, expecting you to just nod and disappear, you don't need to raise your voice to prove them wrong. Just smile, fold your hands, and take your time. Sometimes, the most dangerous sound to a person who underestimated you isn't a shout. It's just a page turning.